He sat there in silence, fingers tapping the armrest, jaw locked. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he did. What he wanted to say was, "You don't get to talk to me like that." But instead he swallowed it. Again, let it slide. Again, told himself to be the bigger person. Again, on the way home it hit him, that slow, creeping nausea that comes from betraying yourself in the name of keeping the peace. He wasn't calm, he was resentful, and under that resentment, shame. Not because he was weak, but because he knew exactly what line had just been crossed, and he let it happen. That's the war between ego and self-respect. And most people, they don't know where the line is until it's too late. Here's the truth. Ego and self-respect wear the same face until you study their hands. Both stand tall. Both demand space. Both say, "I won't tolerate that." But only one is rooted in truth. The other is performing. Ego says, "I need to win." Self-respect says, "I need to be real." Ego says, "They need to see me as strong." Self-respect says, "I need to feel aligned, even if they misunderstand me." And that difference? It's everything. Ego is reactive. It's loud. It's the punch thrown in a quiet room just to prove you still exist. Self-respect is silent. It doesn't shout, it withdraws. It doesn't fight to be right. It walks because the ground no longer feels sacred. You can scream in ego and feel nothing, or you can say nothing in self-respect and feel everything. Here's the dangerous part. Most people confuse ego collapse with humility. They think being humble means swallowing disrespect. They think it means accepting mistreatment, staying small, letting others lead even when they shouldn't. They wear submission like a virtue and call it grace. But that's not humility. That's the absence of self-respect. And it's how people end up lost, respected by no one, including themselves. Because there comes a point where kindness without boundaries is no longer noble. It's self-erasure. Imagine this. Someone crosses a line, maybe subtly, maybe directly, and you pause. You ask yourself, if I say something, am I defending my self-respect or inflating my ego? It's a critical question, because sometimes silence is wisdom, and sometimes silence is self-betrayal. Knowing the difference is the mark of someone who has done the work, someone who has bled through enough wrong turns to know when they're about to take another. Let's draw the line clearly. Self-respect leaves when dignity does. Ego leaves when pride is bruised. Self-respect protects your peace. Ego protects your image. Self-respect walks away from what drains. Ego walks away from what doesn't praise. One is rooted in worth. The other is rooted in fear. That's why self-respect is quiet. It doesn't need backup. But ego needs an audience. It needs the last word. It needs validation for its exit, because it doesn't feel real without applause. Here's how it shows up in real life. You're in a relationship. Things go sideways. Your partner criticizes you. Maybe they're right, maybe not. Ego snaps back. It deflects, blames, makes it about them. It refuses to admit fault. Self-respect listens. It sits with the discomfort. It takes what's true and discards what isn't without needing to retaliate. Or maybe it isn't true. Maybe it is disrespect. Ego yells. Self-respect leaves because self-respect doesn't entertain long arguments over short truths. If the space no longer honors your presence, your self-respect will quietly exit the room. No announcement, no spectacle. Let's go deeper. Ego wants to win arguments. Self-respect wants to win freedom. Ego wants the last word. Self-respect wants the last peaceful breath. Ego is constantly proving. Self-respect is unbothered. Not because it doesn't care, but because it doesn't need to convince anyone anymore. And if you've ever walked away from someone who expected you to beg, expected you to explain, expected you to fold, and you simply didn't, then you've tasted self-respect, and you know it doesn't need witnesses to feel right. So why do we slip into ego instead? Because ego is easy. It's addictive. It gives us fast relief, that burst of righteousness, that hit of self-importance. It makes us feel tall in the moment, even if it leaves us empty after. Self-respect, on the other hand, costs. It costs you comfort. It costs you popularity. It costs you the thrill of being right. But it gives you something ego never can: alignment. And alignment, true alignment, is quiet power. You sleep better. You speak less. You attract people who no longer drain you, because your frequency no longer begs for chaos. Think of the times you've said, "They don't get to treat me like that." Now ask yourself, was that self-respect or ego? Because self-respect doesn't always need confrontation. Sometimes it just needs a boundary, or a departure, or silence. But ego? Ego wants to be seen walking away. It wants them to know they lost you. It wants them to hurt a little, and that's the difference. One leaves for peace, the other leaves for attention. Here's another tell. Ego explodes. Self-respect evolves. Ego says, "They'll regret this." Self-respect says, "I don't belong here." Ego says, "I'll show them." Self-respect says, "This no longer reflects me." See the shift? One is about them, the other is about you. And once you truly respect yourself, the drama becomes boring. The games become childish. The need to explain yourself evaporates because your energy no longer revolves around convincing people you're enough. You just are. This is where self-respect becomes quiet elegance, not arrogance, not smugness, but the kind of presence that enters a room and doesn't shrink, that smiles when misunderstood, that says less, but means more, because it's no longer trying to be liked. It's too busy being true. It's easy to talk about self-respect in theory, but real life makes you choose. Choose between being liked or being respected. Choose between keeping the peace or keeping your soul. Choose between another night pretending you're okay or one hard conversation that ends the illusion. Because you don't build self-respect in easy moments. You build it in the silence that follows saying what needed to be said, even when your voice shook. You build it when you say no without guilt, when you walk away without explanation, when you stop calling people back just because they're used to your energy being on tap. That's where it lives. Not in grand speeches, but in micro-boundaries, daily decisions, quiet refusals. So how do you know when you're operating from self-respect? It feels calm. It doesn't spike your nervous system. It doesn't leave you breathless, shaky, or angry. It doesn't demand revenge. It just says, "This isn't mine to carry anymore." And it puts it down. Self-respect is a closed door without a slam. It's a blocked number without the social media post. It's a changed tone, not a raised voice. Because when you respect yourself, you no longer chase understanding from people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop performing for tables you should have walked away from years ago. Now let's talk about where it gets hardest. Relationships. Romantic, familial, platonic. It doesn't matter. When love is on the line, ego and self-respect get tangled fast. You want to be heard but not harsh. You want to be kind but not used. You want to forgive but not forget yourself in the process. And if you're not careful, you'll confuse ego with empowerment. Ego will tell you to cut them off cold. Self-respect will let you grieve what you lost, but still walk away. Ego will push you to send one more message to prove your point. Self-respect will delete the draft and go for a walk. Ego says, "If they don't come back, They never cared. Self-respect says, even if they cared, I care about myself more. And that right there, that's the shift that frees you. Because when self-respect becomes the baseline, not the exception, everything changes. Your circle shrinks, your energy refines, your boundaries get cleaner. Your life starts to feel like yours again. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing apologies. You stop asking people to please just try to understand. And they notice. Some get uncomfortable, some get angry. Some try to guilt you back into the version of you they were comfortable with, the softer, quieter, more agreeable you. But that version, she's gone. Not bitter, not closed, just clear. And clarity has no patience for chaos masquerading as connection. But what if you've already crossed the line? What if ego has burned bridges? What if self-respect showed up late, and now you're standing in the rubble? Then you rebuild. Not the relationship, the self. Because self-respect isn't just about holding the line. It's also about restoring it after you've let it fall. You don't need to shame yourself for every time you overreacted, tolerated too much, or confused attention with value. You just need to stop calling it love when it's actually survival. You just need to stop calling it peace when it's really silence from suppression. And when you begin again, you start smaller. One decision at a time. You pause before you speak. You sit with your emotions before you text them. You ask, does this protect my truth or my pride? And then you move. Even if it's slow, even if it's awkward, even if it feels unnatural, because it will. Self-respect is like a muscle, atrophied from years of stretching too far for others. You won't lift your full weight overnight, but you will feel yourself returning. Now here's the paradox. The more self-respect you develop, the less conflict you attract. Why? Because people sense it. They know you're not the one to test anymore, not because you bark, but because you won't bite the bait. You'll just leave, without chaos, without warning, without wasting breath on explaining your boundaries to people who treat them like negotiable suggestions. That kind of restraint? It's terrifying to manipulators. It's magnetic to those who value depth. And it changes the kind of life you live, permanently. So here's where we draw the line, finally. Ego demands validation. Self-respect demands nothing. Ego waits to be seen. Self-respect sees itself. Ego begs for closure. Self-respect gives it. Ego says, make them regret. Self-respect says, I forgive you, but I don't return. And when you reach that point where peace matters more than being understood, where silence becomes your most sacred response, where your worth is no longer up for auction in other people's approval, then you've made the shift, and no one can take that from you, not again. Know the difference. Ego is loud and brittle. Self-respect is quiet and unshakable. And once you know the difference, your whole life changes. If you're still here, it's because this hits deeper than just content. So take a second, subscribe. This is where surface ends and substance begins.